Star Trek is weird.
Nothing about what the heart of real science fiction is. Stories about people and ideas.
But even beyond the strangeness of deep space, a legendary show has some odd behind-the-scenes stories that some fans might not know.
Star Trek only ran for 3 seasons, but it became one of the most influential science fiction franchises of all time. Premiering on NBC in 1966, the series followed the crew of the USS Enterprise on a mission to explore strange new worlds. Led by William Shatner's Captain Kirk and Leonard Nimoy's Mr. Spock, the cast also included DeForest Kelley, Nichelle Nichols, Takei, and James Doohan. Despite its now legendary status, the show struggled with ratings, faced cancellation multiple times, and was taken off the air in 1969. Today, we're uncovering 13 shocking facts about Star Trek. 1. Lucille Ball saved Star Trek. Believe it or not, Star Trek almost ended before it ever made it to television. Back in 1965, NBC watched the show's first pilot episode, called The Cage, and rejected it. Network executives didn't quite understand what they were looking at, and the studio behind the series, Desilu Productions, wasn't thrilled about spending more money on such an expensive project. For most shows, that would have been the end. But then, Lucille Ball stepped in. At the time, Lucy wasn't just a beloved television star. She also owned and ran Desilu Productions, making her one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. Even though her board of directors thought it was a bad idea and accountants warned that another costly pilot could hurt the company financially, she decided to take the risk. There's a famous story that Lucille Ball initially misunderstood what Star Trek was about. Some reports claim she thought it was a show about entertainers traveling around the world, performing for military troops. When someone finally explained that it was actually about a spaceship crew and an alien with pointed ears, she still chose to support it. That decision changed television history. The second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, was produced and eventually approved by NBC. Without Lucille Ball's support, there would be no Captain Kirk, no Mr. Spock, no Star Trek movies, conventions, spin-offs, or generations of devoted fans. The entire franchise exists because one person believed in a project that almost everyone else had already given up on. 2. The female first officer who disappeared. Most fans know Spock as Kirk's trusted first officer, but originally, that position belonged to someone else entirely. In the first pilot, The Cage, the Enterprise's first officer was a woman known simply as Number 1, played by Nichelle Barrett. She was calm, intelligent, highly capable, and rarely showed emotion. Unfortunately, NBC executives weren't comfortable with the idea. At the time, some network leaders believed audiences wouldn't accept a woman giving orders to male crew members, especially one who wasn't written to be warm or traditionally feminine. There was another complication as well. Barrett was romantically involved with Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, and some executives questioned whether she had been cast because of that relationship. When NBC ordered a new pilot, Number 1 quietly disappeared from the show. But her influence didn't. Instead of removing the character completely, Roddenberry transferred many of her defining traits directly to Spock. In fact, the Spock scene in the original pilot was much more emotional and expressive than the version fans eventually came to know. After the rewrite, those cool, logical, analytical characteristics became Spock's signature personality. Meanwhile, Nichelle Barrett remained part of the Star Trek family. She later returned as Nurse Christine Chapel, married Gene Roddenberry, and eventually became the iconic voice of the Enterprise computer across multiple Star Trek series. 3. NBC thought Spock looked too much like the devil. It's hard to imagine Star Trek without Spock's famous appearance, but originally, he almost looked completely different. Gene Roddenberry first envisioned Spock with bright red skin to make him appear more alien. That idea quickly ran into a problem. Many Americans still watch television on black and white sets, and the red makeup looked strange and muddy on screen. Instead of appearing alien, Spock simply looked odd, so the red skin idea was abandoned. Then NBC found something else to worry about. Network executives thought Spock's pointed ears and sharply angled eyebrows made him resemble a devil-like figure. They feared some religious viewers would object to the character's appearance. Early promotional photos were even altered to make his ears look less pointed and his eyebrows less dramatic. To solve the makeup issue, artist Fred Phillips experimented with a subtle yellow-green skin tone. Ironically, that created another unexpected problem. Whenever the film was processed, technicians assumed the green tint was a mistake and repeatedly corrected it back to a normal flesh color. The makeup department had to keep explaining that the unusual skin tone was intentional. Eventually, everything was sorted out, and once viewers actually saw Spock on television, they didn't see anything frightening. They saw one of the most beloved and recognizable characters in science fiction history. 4. The Vulcan salute came from a real religious tradition. The famous Vulcan salute has become one of the most recognizable gestures on Earth, but it wasn't invented by Star Trek writers. It actually came from a childhood memory that stayed with Leonard Nimoy for decades. Growing up in Boston, Nimoy attended an Orthodox Jewish synagogue with his family. During a special religious blessing, members of the congregation were instructed not to look directly at the ceremony. Tradition held that a sacred presence was present during the blessing. Most people followed the rules. Young Leonard Nimoy didn't. Curious, he peeked. What he saw made a lasting impression. The priests held their hands in a distinctive shape with their fingers separated into a V-like formation. The gesture represented the Hebrew letter Shin, which is connected to one of the names of God. Years later, while filming the second season episode Amok Time, the production needed a unique Vulcan greeting. Nimoy remembered the gesture from his childhood and suggested using it. The director liked the idea. The cameras rolled. And just like that, an ancient religious symbol became part of science fiction history. Nimoy later said one of his favorite things about the gesture was knowing that millions of people around the world were unknowingly sharing a blessing every time they said, "Live long and prosper." 5. The kiss that made NBC nervous. In 1968, Star Trek aired an episode called Plato's Stepchildren. It featured a moment that would become one of the most talked about scenes in television history. William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols shared an interracial kiss. Today, the scene might not seem particularly controversial, but in 1968, it caused serious concern behind the scenes. NBC executives worried about backlash, especially from television stations in parts of the country that might refuse to broadcast the episode. To avoid potential problems, the network ordered an alternate version of the scene. In that version, Kirk and Uhura would move close together but never actually kiss. The studio hoped it could use that version if needed. However, according to Nichelle Nichols, she and Shatner weren't interested in helping create a replacement scene. During the alternate takes, they reportedly crossed their eyes, messed up their timing, made silly expressions, and generally ensured the footage couldn't be used. On one take, Shatner even looked directly into the camera, making it impossible to edit around him. Eventually, production ran out of time. The only usable version left was the original kiss. NBC prepared for a flood of angry viewer complaints. Instead, the network received overwhelmingly positive responses. Many viewers wrote in saying they didn't understand why anyone thought the scene would be controversial in the first place. In the end, the audience proved to be far more accepting than the executives who had worried about protecting them. 6. Scotty was a real war hero. Long before James Doohan became the beloved chief engineer of the Enterprise, he was serving on the front lines during World War II. Doohan was a lieutenant in the Canadian Army and took part in the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, landing on Juno Beach in France under heavy enemy fire. During the battle, he led his men through a dangerous minefield and helped eliminate 2 German snipers. For most people, that would have been enough excitement for one lifetime. But Doohan's most incredible moment happened later that same day. That night, while moving between command positions in the dark, a nervous Canadian sentry mistakenly identified him as an enemy soldier and opened fire. Doohan was hit 6 times. 4 bullets struck his leg. Another shattered his right middle finger. The 6th bullet was headed straight for his chest. It should have killed him. Instead, it slammed into a silver cigarette case he carried in his pocket, a gift from his brother, and stopped there. The cigarette case literally saved his life. Although he lost his finger, he survived the war and eventually found his way to Hollywood. When he was cast as Scotty on Star Trek, Doohan worked hard to keep his missing finger hidden from viewers. He carefully positioned his hands, used strategic camera angles, and occasionally relied on a hand double during close-up shots. Most fans never noticed. A few eagle-eyed viewers eventually spotted it in certain scenes, including a brief moment during The Trouble with Tribbles. For years, audiences saw Scotty as the Enterprise's toughest engineer. What they didn't realize was that James Doohan had already survived far more danger than anything Starfleet could throw at him. 7. The Tribbles that refused to disappear. The Trouble with Tribbles became one of Star Trek's most popular episodes. The story centered around small, furry creatures that multiplied so quickly they eventually overwhelmed the Enterprise. On screen, it was a fun comedy adventure. Behind the scenes, it became a nightmare that wouldn't go away. To create the illusion of thousands of Tribbles, the prop department only built around 500 of them. They were simple creations made from fake fur and foam rubber. Some even contained parts from wind-up toy dogs so they could wiggle and move around on camera. They were inexpensive, effective, and surprisingly adorable. Unfortunately, they also seemed impossible to get rid of. Even after filming wrapped, tribbles kept appearing everywhere. Crew members found them inside lighting equipment, hidden in desk drawers, tucked inside air vents, and stuffed into storage containers. Nobody could remember where they came from. DeForest Kelley later joked that the little furballs seemed to have developed a life of their own. The problem got even worse because the cast found the whole thing hilarious. Actors began hiding tribbles in each other's costumes, dressing rooms, and lunch bags. At one point, Kelley reportedly pulled a tribble out during the filming of a completely different episode just to get a laugh from his fellow cast members. The famous scene where Kirk gets buried beneath a mountain of tribbles took 8 separate takes to complete. Crew members stationed above the set couldn't actually see William Shatner below them, so they kept tossing down more tribbles just to be safe. 8. The fans who refused to let Star Trek die. Today, online campaigns and social media movements happen all the time. Back in the 1960s, fans had to fight for their favorite shows the old-fashioned way, with typewriters, envelopes, and stamps. Near the end of Star Trek's second season, rumors began spreading that NBC planned to cancel the series. Fans weren't about to let that happen. One devoted viewer and her husband organized a massive letter-writing campaign that quickly grew into something television had never seen before. Their strategy was called the Rule of 10. One fan would write a letter to NBC and then encourage 10 friends to do the same. Those 10 people would each recruit 10 more. The idea spread rapidly. Before long, NBC was being flooded with mail. The network officially reported receiving more than 116,000 letters. Some estimates suggest that once petitions and organized mailings were included, the true number may have approached 1 million. The campaign became so overwhelming that NBC reversed course and renewed Star Trek for a third season. The network even publicly asked fans to stop sending so many letters. But the story didn't end there. When Star Trek was finally cancelled after Season 3, fans launched another wave of support. Students at universities like Caltech, MIT, and Berkeley organized marches carrying signs that declared, "It is totally illogical to cancel Star Trek." During the 1970s, fans successfully pushed NASA to name its first space shuttle, Enterprise. 9. The theme song loophole that made Roddenberry millions. Its sweeping orchestral sound perfectly captured the sense of adventure and exploration that defined the series. Composer Alexander Courage created the music. But for years, Gene Roddenberry ended up receiving half of the song's royalty payments. And here's the surprising part: he didn't write the music. At the time, music contracts included a common rule. If someone contributed lyrics to a song, they could legally claim a share of the songwriting royalties. Roddenberry saw an opportunity, so he wrote lyrics for the Star Trek theme. The lyrics were never intended to be performed. In fact, most people who have read them describe them as fairly awkward and overly sentimental, focusing on themes of love drifting through the stars. Roddenberry never planned to put them in the show. He simply wrote them down and officially registered them. That technicality was enough. By doing so, he became a co-writer in the eyes of the royalty system. As a result, every time the Star Trek theme generated royalties, Roddenberry received half of the money. Alexander Courage was reportedly furious. Although the arrangement was legal, he felt it was deeply unfair since Roddenberry had contributed nothing to the actual composition. The disagreement damaged their professional relationship, and Courage never became heavily involved with later seasons of the series. Meanwhile, Star Trek continued growing in popularity around the world. Through reruns, movies, and future spin-offs, the royalties kept coming. What started as a few unused lyrics eventually generated millions of dollars over the decades. 10. Star Trek helped inspire the cell phone. When Star Trek first aired, the communicator looked like pure science fiction. Crew members could flip open a small handheld device and instantly talk to people across enormous distances. In 1966, that seemed impossible. Just a few years later, reality began catching up. Martin Cooper, an engineer at Motorola, developed the world's first handheld mobile phone in 1973. Over the years, Cooper openly acknowledged that Star Trek played a role in inspiring him. Watching Captain Kirk flip open his communicator made him believe portable communication devices could someday become real. The story became famous and was repeated countless times. Later, Cooper clarified that the full truth was a little more complicated. His earliest inspiration actually came from Dick Tracy's two-way wrist radio, which had fascinated him as a child. Still, Star Trek remained an important influence, and it made for a much better story whenever cameras showed up. Motorola certainly embraced the connection. In 1996, the company released a mobile phone called the StarTAC. The name itself was a tribute to Star Trek. Even the flip-open design intentionally resembled Kirk's communicator. What had once seemed like an impossible gadget from a television show had become a real product carried by millions of people. Star Trek imagined the future. A few decades later, the future started looking a lot like Star Trek. 11. The line everyone remembers. That was never said. Few phrases are more closely connected to Star Trek than "Beam me up, Scotty." Even people who have never watched an episode know the quote. It's appeared on t-shirts, mugs, posters, commercials, and countless parodies over the years. There's just one small problem. Captain Kirk never actually says it. Not once. Across all 79 episodes of the original series, the exact phrase "Beam me up, Scotty" never appears. That might sound impossible, but it's true. Kirk says plenty of similar lines throughout the show. Sometimes it's "Scotty, beam us up." Other times it's simply "Beam me up" or "Scotty, get us out of here." The wording changes depending on the situation, but the famous version everyone remembers was never spoken. Somehow, over the years, different lines blended together in the public imagination and created a quote that became bigger than the show itself. By the 1990s, even the cast had stopped trying to correct people. James Doohan embraced it completely, naming his 1996 autobiography "Beam Me Up, Scotty." At that point, the phrase had taken on a life of its own. Millions of people were quoting a line that never existed, proving that sometimes pop culture creates its own reality. 12. The Star Trek cast really reached the stars. Gene Roddenberry spent much of his life imagining humanity's future among the stars. After his death, that dream became surprisingly real. The journey began in 1992. A small portion of Roddenberry's ashes traveled aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia during a mission in Earth orbit before returning home. It was a symbolic tribute to the man who had inspired generations to look toward the future, but that was only the beginning. In 1997, Roddenberry became part of the first commercial memorial spaceflight ever offered to the public. His ashes were launched into orbit alongside those of writer and counterculture icon Timothy Leary. For roughly 5 years, the capsule circled Earth before eventually re-entering the atmosphere in 2002 and burning up like a shooting star. It sounded like something straight out of a science fiction script. Then the connection between Star Trek and space exploration became even stronger. In 2008, a small portion of James Doohan's ashes was secretly carried to the International Space Station by a space tourist and stored aboard the station. It was a fitting tribute to the man who had spent decades pretending to keep a starship running. But the most remarkable mission came much later. In January 2024, a memorial spaceflight launched aboard the Vulcan Centaur rocket. The mission carried the remains of several key Star Trek figures, including Gene Roddenberry, Majel Barrett, Nichelle Nichols, James Doohan, and DeForest Kelley. Instead of remaining in Earth orbit, the capsule traveled beyond Earth's gravitational pull and entered an orbit around the Sun. More than half a century after Star Trek first introduced audiences to a future among the stars, several of the people who helped create that future finally made the journey themselves. In a way, the crew of the Enterprise really did complete one last mission. And those were 13 shocking facts about the original Star Trek. From Lucille Ball saving the show before it even aired to members of the cast literally traveling into space decades later, it's amazing how many incredible stories happen behind the scenes of this legendary series. Which fact surprised you the most? Was it the quote that was never actually spoken, the real-life war hero behind Scotty, or the conversation that convinced Nichelle Nichols to stay aboard the Enterprise? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, live long and prosper.